So one of my secrets is that I break out key categories. There are some things on a tax return, and here's where, for example, taxes are different from just financial bookkeeping. There are some places where you get a choice between using this method or that method. And depending on which one comes out better for you on your taxes, you're going to pick that one. But in order to do that, you have to actually track it both ways all year long. If you have your book set up so you're tracking both ways all year long, then what happens is when it comes to tax time, you avoid the stress of recalculating everything in that category. Welcome to the Sunlight Podcast. In this show, we're talking about taxes, money, and careers for self-employed people who have a big vision for changing the world with their work. I'm your host, Hannah Cole, artist, tax pro, and the founder of Sunlight Tax. If you're a creative or soul-centered entrepreneur or wellness practitioner who wants to grow your business sustainably, manage your taxes, and build a stash of fuck you money so you can control your time and have a bigger impact with your work, you are in the right place. Hello, welcome to the Sunlight Podcast. Today, I want to talk to you about what bookkeeping is really for and who actually needs fancy, complicated bookkeeping and who doesn't. All right, so it's really easy to get overwhelmed and confused when it comes to your bookkeeping. And I think most people, if you don't have any formal accounting training, and most of us don't, it's really easy to kind of get caught into all the language and categories inside of various bookkeeping softwares that you see, or things that your friends need, or things you've read in the news, and not understand kind of what role bookkeeping is actually supposed to play in your business versus a different kind of business. Okay. So a micro business, which if you're listening to this podcast is probably you. I mean, even me at the level that I am a micro business, right? A micro business is actually quite a bit larger than the dollar amount that you might think it is. A micro business has very different needs when it comes to bookkeeping than a larger business does. So let's get into what those differences are and what it is that you actually need. Because I think when you listen to this episode, what you're going to realize is your bookkeeping does not need to be that complicated. And when you understand what the purpose of bookkeeping is for you, you can focus on a lot fewer things, and you can spend a lot less time on it, and you can have a much simpler setup that is far easier for you to handle. Okay? So that's the point. We're going to get you to a place where you feel really confident in simplifying the way that you do bookkeeping. So first off, if you're listening to this podcast, the chances are you do not need what we call audited financial statements. Okay, what the fuck is an audited financial statement? All right. So a lot of bookkeeping and accounting revolves around the needs of larger companies, the largest being publicly traded companies that we actually can buy shares of on the US or international stock exchanges. The Securities and Exchange Commissions is a regulatory body in the US that actually regulates the way that financial statements must be prepared if you are a publicly traded company like Coca-Cola, like Tesla, like Berkshire Hathaway. Okay. Now, if you're listening to this podcast, you aren't running a company like that, right? Almost nobody listening to this podcast ever is at the helm of a publicly traded company. That is a huge company. It's nothing like the business that you have. Audited financial statements are a really awesome thing. They're important, right? But they are for a level of business that has nothing to do with you and your small business. Okay. So these are the categories of people who actually do need audited financials. And I'll get a little bit into what that's about. So if you're a publicly traded company, if you're selling shares, if you're bringing on stockholders, people are buying equities of your business, you need audited financials. Also, if you have a large retirement fund, the IRS actually steps in with some regulations. You need audited financials. If you have a retirement fund, I believe it's over 100 people in your 401k program, for example. And that's because there are rules around the tax shelter of a 401k that the IRS regulates. So they want to see audited financials to make sure basically that your financial statements are on the up and up. That's a good thing. Nonprofits also need an annual audited financial statements to maintain their nonprofit status. Again, this is saying like, basically, do you have certified legitimate books and financial records and controls? Because if we're going to let you pay no taxes, we want to see that you are, maintaining a legitimate organization, that this is not somebody's slush fund, right? So that's also really important. That's also a sort of IRS side requirement versus the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, which regulates publicly traded companies, like stocks, the stock market, that kind of thing. The one category, so you probably are not in any of those categories. Maybe if you're listening, you might have a nonprofit. A couple of my clients do, but probably you're not in any of those categories. The one group of you who may at times, not every year, but just every rare occasion may need audited financials is if you are going to a bank, if you're going to get a business loan, or if you are like my friend Jessie, for example, who's at the Asheville Tea Company, she very likely has needed audited financials at times because the Asheville Tea Company has taken on shareholders, right? So if you're in a startup phase of a business and you actually want to take on shareholders and have investors in your business, that would be a time that you need audited financials. So what does it even mean, audited financials? So the point there is basically in accounting, when we have financial statements like the balance sheet, statement of cash flow, and the profit and loss statement, the point of those is that they need to follow the same rules across the board. The point is you should be able to look at one balance sheet from one company and compare it to a balance sheet from another company, and it should mean the same thing. The way that you come to, for example, your top line revenue number should be the same at this company as at this company. And there's a whole regulatory body that sort of talks about what the proper rules are for that kind of accounting. It's called GAAP, Generally Agreed On Accounting Principles. So GAAP accounting means that you're doing things sort of according to the rules, right? So again, this is something that's important for larger companies. It's less of a big deal when you are a small scale business, like a self-employed person. So, and also just like a little side note, if you've ever wondered what the letters in CPA stand for, certified public accountant, have you ever thought about that public part and been like, why public, right? What does that mean? So that actually plays into this. That's what this is about. The idea is a CPA does an audit. A CPA, part of the 4 subject areas that a CPA studies is audit. The process of audit. That doesn't mean audits for the IRS. That means audit is a methodology in accounting to kind of comb through stuff and see that it is right and proper, right? So a CPA, one thing that a CPA can do for you is provide audited financial statements. That is a service that CPAs provide. The public is because those statements need to be, generally, it's going to be public facing. And because, for example, if you're a publicly traded company, then you need that. So that's sort of what the public part of CPA is getting at. Now, the rest of us, we don't need these things. We don't need audited financials, okay? For most small businesses, if your income is anywhere between $0 and say $100,000, actually probably all the way up to $500,000, you just don't need this. You don't need audited financial statements. So when you're running a small business, especially one who files your taxes on a Schedule C, and P.S., a Schedule C is just the default. So if you don't even know what I'm talking about when I say that, you have a Schedule C. What I mean is that if you don't have another tax entity like an S Corp, a partnership, or a C corporation, then your needs are very different. Okay. Basically, at this scale, the micro business scale that you're at, if you're listening to this podcast, the chief reasons that you need bookkeeping are you need to know your profit and you need to have predictability around what you owe for taxes. That's kind of it, right? You do need to know every quarter how much profit you made. And that is, one, so you can make business decisions so you know how much money you have and if you're profitable. But 2, you also need to know your profit so that you can pay your estimated quarterly taxes. That's another very key and important reason You need to know your numbers when you are a micro business. Okay. So that's it. Knowing what you owe for taxes and knowing what your profit is. That's kind of the reason that you need bookkeeping.
Hey, real quick, I just wanted to pop in and tell you that my book, Taxes for Humans, Simplify Your Taxes and Change the World When You're Self-Employed, is available for the first time ever as a pre-order. Pre-orders are massively important to the success of this book, and I am so grateful and will send you gifts for your pre-order. If you're interested in getting this super empowering, super funny book, you can go to sunlighttax.com/book. All the details you need are there, and more details will be forthcoming. And thank you so much. I hope you enjoy Taxes for Humans. I've worked really hard to make it awesome for you, and your pre-order means the world to me.
Bookkeeping itself can bring small businesses into a real world of confusion because it's actually a pretty complicated system when you use what is called double entry bookkeeping. I could do a whole episode on what that is. It's a really cool system invented in the Renaissance by the bookkeepers, the best bookkeepers in the world, who were hired by the Medici family, who you may know because they also hired the best artists to make the best art that you probably studied in art history. But anyway, that's how old double entry bookkeeping is. It's a really cool system, and that's what all software today is based on, but you don't actually even need it. Right. So the thing about double entry bookkeeping that is so confusing for people is that two accounts, there's a double entry for everything that happens. If I buy $5,000 of supplies, then in double entry bookkeeping, my supply account, like the actual supplies I have on hand, goes up by $5,000. But my cash account at the same time goes down by $5,000. So I'm $5,000 richer in actual supplies, and I'm $5,000 poorer in money, in cash, right? That's the double part of double entry bookkeeping. It's pretty magical. It's pretty powerful. It actually allows you to track all kinds of things that were never trackable before it was invented. But it also can make you very confused if you don't have formal accounting training, because you really need accounting training to understand how it works, right? There's debits and credits. There's the left side of the balance and the right side of the balance. There's liabilities, equity, and assets. I mean, it gets complicated. Okay. And this is why it's really best left to a bookkeeper to set up, because your average person without training cannot set up bookkeeping on a double entry system without getting some categories confused, because a lot of times you're like, wait a minute, why are subscriptions to my membership a liability? That doesn't make any sense. Well, it does make sense if you kind of understand financial accounting and how it works, but you don't need to. That's the point. Okay. So these complicated things, basically the short answer here, you don't need them. They're not for you. Okay. Now, the second issue is that taxes, tax accounting, and bookkeeping, financial accounting, are two separate things. If you go back to school for accounting, financial accounting and tax accounting are two different tracks in the accounting program. They're not the same thing. So this is really clear once you actually formally start studying accounting. But I think most, lay people, you start selling cookies out of your garage on weekends, you don't know this, right? And that's totally fine. It's totally okay. But it's a little confusing, right? So a lot of us think that our bookkeeping is exactly the same thing as what goes on our tax return. And that's not actually the case. It's very similar, but there are some key areas where it's different. Okay. That's the thing you need to know. So what's really kind of funny is when you have what is called a tax entity. So if you form, for example, an S corporation, so I'm an S corp as Sunlight Tax. When you're an S corporation, you actually highlight on your S corp tax return, which is called an 1120S. On that tax return, I actually have to provide both versions. So I do the tax accounting and the financial accounting. So in other words, an S corp tax return, you actually include a balance sheet in your taxes to show the financial, like the bookkeeping part. And then you do a reconciliation, which is called the book tax difference. In other words, you don't have to know all those details, but what I want you to understand from this is that we acknowledge at the sort of higher level business that's bigger and has more admin to it, we are actually openly acknowledging on our taxes that the bookkeeping and the taxes are a little bit different. And we're actually showing where the places of difference are on the tax return. Okay. That's what I want you to know. The interesting thing that is actually creating a really big headache for most people with small businesses is that on a Schedule C, which is the default, that's where you file your taxes with your small business when you're self-employed, there is no reconciliation like that, which means if you don't know this, it's really easy to get confused about it, to think it's all the same thing. So that's the part I want you to understand, is that there are some really key differences and it can be really confusing. So you might need to move to a system where you track, you actually maintain the financial statements using double entry bookkeeping software. If you, for example, form an S Corp, then you're going to need that. Okay. If you take on employees, it's a good idea to have it, right? And there are some other scenarios where you might want to have software that's double entry bookkeeping, as all software is. And that's totally fine, right? But if you're just starting out, if you have a young business, if you're a solopreneur, you don't need that level of complication. Okay. So I wanted to talk about the spreadsheet system that I created and the reason that I created it, and how it solves this problem. Now, you don't have to ever use it in order to benefit. I think just like hearing me talk about it right now is going to make some things clear to you that you probably felt confused about before. That's my hope in kind of outlining why I created a spreadsheet bookkeeping system for people with small businesses. So what I did was basically, as an artist, as a painter, I had a very simple spreadsheet where I tracked my expenses, basically, and my income in my painting operation and my painting business. And at the point where I started going back to school for accounting and actually learning the sort of, both the financial statement side and the tax accounting side, what I did was I took this spreadsheet system that I had used for years already as just a painter, and I started mapping the categories of expenses directly to how they come onto your tax return. Okay. This was just personal. This was the system I used personally for my own books as a painter. So I was mapping all of the categories straight to my Schedule C. What this means is that I only had to track the categories of expense that were on the Schedule C, and that I wouldn't have to recalculate them at tax time because they were already pre-sorted into the right buckets, right? So that was sort of the baseline of this spreadsheet system. But over time, I came to refine it more and more, so it was more powerful. Let me just talk to you about the other stuff that it does. So one of my secrets is that I break out key categories. There are some things on a tax return, and here's where, for example, taxes are different from just financial bookkeeping. There are some places where you get a choice between using this method or that method, and depending on which one comes out better for you on your taxes, you're going to pick that one. But in order to do that, you have to actually track it both ways all year long. If you have your book set up so you're tracking both ways all year long, then what happens is when it comes to tax time, you avoid the stress of recalculating everything in that category. I'll give you an example. Your meals, right? Meals while you're traveling, there's a different method you can use optionally that's often better for you. Or you can use the actual expense that you paid for that business meal. Now, if you lump all your business meals together into only one category, you are going to have to recalculate that category every single time it comes to tax time. And that is so freaking annoying. This is what causes you all that headache and stress where you're like, wait, I tracked this. Why do I have to redo all my work? Right? So what I did was I built my spreadsheet system where you're automatically set up to track both methods at the same time, so that when it comes to tax time, you just look down the chart and you compare this number versus this number, which one is a bigger deduction for me? And then you pick that one instead of having to go back in and pick all your travel meals out of the category of business meals and recalculate all of it. Okay. So that is one of those special categories where calculating something in two different ways just saves you tons of headache and stress when it comes to time to calculate for your taxes. So that's a really important thing. I also want to talk to you about tracking the things that go on your tax return, but actually don't get tracked normally in bookkeeping software. Okay. That's another important thing that I integrated into my spreadsheet bookkeeping system because it's a thing that's really easy to miss because you don't see it when it's not in your QuickBooks, right? So here's how that works. Your mileage, your home office, rent, internet, travel, these are things that have special ways of getting calculated on your tax return that are allowed to go onto your Schedule C, but aren't set up as categories inside of your bookkeeping. Why is that? That's because some of the things you're allowed to deduct when you're a small business are partially used for personal reasons and partially used for business, right? Your car is a great example of that. You probably use the same car to drive to the grocery store, to pick up your kids, as you use to go to an opening, do a supply run, visit a client, right? So part of that mileage, the client, the supply run, that is deductible. And part of the mileage, the grocery store, the kid pickup, is not deductible. And so this is an area where you're splitting one expense between two places, taxes and personal. Okay. So on my spreadsheet system, I have various tabs where we pull out these things, mileage, travel, your home studio, so that we can see which portion of that personal expense is actually something you get to take as a business expense. Okay. So those are the two really key ways that my spreadsheet system simplifies your taxes because it just keeps it highlighted and tracked all year long as part of your system, as part of your setup, so that you're not going through that just headache scramble that feels so terrible at tax time. Okay. Because I know it, right? Like I've been there too. When I started out as an artist, I did not know this stuff. I had to go through the headache and the hassle of recalculating and pulling my hair out and not understanding why, even though I tracked this all year and thought I was doing a good thing, why I still ended up with this total mess of calculation at tax time. So that is basically the point behind this simple spreadsheet bookkeeping system that I have produced that I sell within my program called Money Bootcamp. So what is the takeaway for you? First of all, if you are a really scrappy DIY person, it's totally fine. I do all kinds of stuff acknowledging the DIY scrappy creative people out there who are very similar to how I was when I started. And so please take advantage of all my free stuff. I absolutely love it. If you are that person, if you are a DIY scrappy person and you want to do this all yourself, you can get started by downloading the free tax deductions guide, my visual guide to your tax deductions. And you can create your own spreadsheet where you map those deductions on my visual guide that's free to your own spreadsheet. You can do that on your own. You can do that for absolutely free. That guide is at sunlighttax.com/deductions guide. Okay. So that's there for you. Thank you for listening. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe, leave a review. It really helps, and share it with a friend. I'm so grateful. This podcast is for education and entertainment only. Nothing in this episode should be taken as individual tax or financial advice. You can find all the tools, books, and links we reference at sunlighttax.com/podcast.